Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to today's training webinar on the newest release of Journyx, which is known as Endeavor and version 12.1. Especially to those of you who endured our technical difficulties last week, thank you for coming back to the rescheduled webinar. And Meredith, it will definitely be worth your wait, as Meredith has got a lot of goodness to show you today. So before we get started and before I hand it over to her, I just want to let everyone know that we are recording this webinar and it will be posted in the Journyx user community at community.journyx.com and also emailed out to everyone as early as tomorrow. And also, if you have any questions, you can feel free to put those into the questions box in the GoToWebinar panel at any time, and we will be taking or answering those questions at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Meredith.
Thank you, Carrie. This is Meredith Zachritz. I'm the Director of Product here at Journyx, and I'll be walking you through what's new in the Endeavor release. Obviously, one thing that you might notice if you've been here a while that's new is that we have nicknames for our releases now. As we get into this 12.1.3.4, 79, etc., it gets kind of cumbersome to refer to the numbers. So we are going with some nicknames that'll just make it helpful to identify different releases. And as you can see, this 12.1.0 is Endeavor. The numbers won't go away. We'll still use those to refer to, the very specific maintenance versions you're on, etc. But you will see Endeavor and other nicknames like this in future release materials. So let's jump into what you actually want to see here, what's new in the Endeavor release. There are a number of improvements around reporting, from the user experience to security, and just a bunch of new things that you can do in reporting that will then help us to continue to build out more robust options for your internal reporting in Journyx, and security for your external reporting. So we'll go through what the new features in Endeavor are. We are also continuing to build out time entry automation, and with that, we've got some improvements to the notifications that we'll take a look at. We also, in Journyx 12, we completely reworked the manager approval experience, and we've now worked with customers who use it in the field, and they had some feedback on some additional customizations that they'd like to see. So we added those in the Endeavor release, and we'll take a look at what those are. And then finally, for those of you who use Journyx PX, we added some flexibility, really granularity for single versus multi-assignment mode. And I'll explain at the end what that means for those of you who know. The rest of you can take a break while I talk about the PX functionality. So let's go ahead and jump straight into reviewing what we've done here. And we're going to start with our reporting. This is the internal reporting for the browser-based reporting in Journyx. Obviously, you have a number of options to review your data in the Journyx system or from the Journyx system, but this is the reporting that we offer internally, your browser-based reports. So what we did here is we updated the kind of the default output of a report. You probably have all run a report at some point or another. And if you were looking at a release prior to Endeavor, you would have seen these referred to as HTML printable. We killed that off. That's sort of techie speak anyway. But we offer now a new default format to reports called the web format. And that's what it will default to when you run it. As you can see, you still have options for plain text and export to Excel. The printable is still the same format. It's just referred to as web printable. But this new web output replaces the old HTML output. So when we go to run report, what you get are some summarization, pagination, control over what results you see, search for what results that you see. So a lot of options here to view this in a way that makes sense for the browser in a richer format. And so, as I said, if you've got subtotals like we do here in this report, you'll start out with a summary view, but you can drill down And as you'll see, I have my results to only show 5 lines. So I also get pagination here. So I can go view my results page to page. Now maybe I don't really like to see my results split amongst pages, so I could go and I could make this larger, and then I'd have fewer pages, or I could even just set it to all and always see all of my results as I drill down. Now I could also restore this to something similar to what you're used to seeing in the old, list absolutely everything report by setting it to all and doing an expand all. So you do have the option to expand and collapse rows. There we go. A lot of data in this report. And so I can see all of my data on one page if I so choose. That's a lot of data though, of course, and a lot to digest and scroll through, so the pagination and the row results, sorry, I'm having trouble scrolling all the way through it, helps to control some of that data that's displayed on the screen in a way that makes sense for you. And then, of course, you can always return to the summarized view with the collapse all. Now, I can also search through some of the details. When I have the details expanded, I also have the option to search. Let's see if I have anything in here. Nope, not that one. So let's try time off. There we go. And so I can reduce this to just this user's time off records, for example. So I can search through the details and also filter results. And then, of course, I can remove that and go back to the full list. So a lot of options here to view your report data in a more sensible fashion, to do some quick filtering. Like I said, limit the results to those that you can see on a single page. A lot of good controls here for the report output. Now, one thing to note, that if you want something that looks pretty similar to what you were used to in your old reports, for whatever reason, the printable version is essentially the same as it was before, and so it will list the entire thing. So you go over here to your menu with report options. We can pull up the printable version and you can see it looks like your list report of with subtotals within the lines of the report. So you can still get to your old views if there's a use case where that's needed. It hasn't gone away. It is worth noting that because this report has features and functionality that really can't just be attached to an email, that you, when you go to email a report that's a web report, your only option will be to include it as a link in that email. And there's some instructions here. This is true of all email reports, but when you email a report, the data is static, regardless of whether it comes as a link or as an attachment. So when you email a report to other users, those users will see the data that you see, always. It does not filter the data based on their roles and access. If you're wanting your users to see a report with only the data that they have, so say to different managers where only those managers see their own data of the people that they manage, then you copy report templates in that case. So an emailed report is really about sending, a static report to other people. But in the case of the web report, it's going to be sent as a link and it will require login. So that's just a slight change. However, if you go back to printable, for example, you have the option to attach it to the email as always. So back to run report. Let's take a look at another change that we added to our internal reports. As you notice, that you still have this report actions menu. It used to be on the left. So this is a slight change from how it used to be. However, it is consistent with all of the UI upgrades that we made for Journyx 12. So all of these actions and settings menus are going to be in that upper right corner. So this is more consistent with the new interface. But you've always had the option from a report to go to the full modify screen and change your settings. And then, of course, you can save the report and it saves the settings for future use. However, there's a new quick filters option that offers you a slightly different option from the standard modify. So the quick filters here, I can do dates and I can do filters. And I can still save and run the report, so it still saves the report settings permanently for reuse later. But I have a new option here, and it's this run. And so this concept here is the idea that I can run a report template that I have saved, and I want to keep it saved the way it is, but I want to do some kind of ad hoc runtime settings this one time to look at the data in a different way. And it could be to change the dates. You know, I want to run it for a longer period or a different period, a different kind of set period, right? I want to do this, you know, for 6 months, just this one time, but I don't want to save the underlying report. I want the report to stick to 3 months. Or maybe I just want to filter for some projects. And so I can do that here. I can select specific projects. Let's say today, whatever reason, I like this report for all the data that it has in it most of the time, but right now all I'm interested in is seeing my time off. Now I can make that change here, and I can hit run, and my underlying report will not change. I will not have changed my project filters at all, but for the duration of this report, viewing this report, it will hold on to this change. And so you can see there's less data here. If we drill down, we can see we've got this time off, and it will retain this one-time change, this runtime change, if I view other periods. So as long as I'm viewing this report, it's going to retain these changes. However, if I leave the screen and I come back, and we'll just look at the modification screen here. If I look at my report filters, you can see that I have no project filters. So it didn't save the underlying report. And so this is the option to do your runtime settings, and your upgrade guide will explain exactly how to access it right here in the date of the report. This is something that we've been people have been requesting for a long time, so we're really happy to have it available now. Now let's turn a little bit to reporting externally, because we also have some additional work that we did, particularly around security. For when you connect using a third-party BI tool or any third-party tool, but a third-party BI tool is a common use case for this. And you don't really want to store your Journyx password and credentials in some other system. So API keys allow users to access the API without storing the credentials in these third-party systems. So they can connect to the Journyx API in these third-party systems. Now, we had kind of piloted a feature where you could turn on API keys and allow people to use them, but there were not many options to kind of control those keys, how they were used, and so we've added some security and options around them. So let's take a look first at the security settings themselves. So we have this option to turn on API keys in general. Are you going to allow anyone to use an API key to access Journyx data from a third-party system? And so you have to turn this on to use them. But then we also have this option to set API keys to expire. This is new, and it defaults to 180 days. That is the maximum number of days that a key can be good for before it expires. And so you can set it to be lower, but 180 days is the maximum that we offer by default. Obviously, if you have a use case where you feel like you need more time, you can work with us to change that. But we're essentially setting kind of best practices, and so 180 days is the highest that you can go before an API key expires. In addition to the security features, we've added better granularity to the access. So if you're familiar with your system roles, you have managers, you have users, you have administrators, reporters, that sort of thing. So in addition to turning on API key abilities, you also would need to assign a role or a role ability to your users who will be using API keys. So there's the ability to generate, and then there's the ability to use one to sign in. And these abilities can be added to your, if you already have a custom role, defined in the system for, say, some type of manager who needs to report in, say, Power BI, then you can give that manager these role abilities to generate and sign in with API keys. But there are distinctions there. So I can use the API key in Power BI, and I can generate a key to use in Power BI. So those are the abilities. And it just gives you a little more control over how and when those keys are used. So let's take a look at a user who has the ability to both generate and use API keys. And we'll just kind of take a look at how they manage those. So under my settings, anyone who has the ability to generate or use API keys will see a section for API keys. And you can see it's, if you have a situation where you need a bunch of different keys for different uses, obviously you've got, kind of this results-oriented screen that you can search for, any API key that you're looking for to review, to edit, to delete, etc. So if you go to create a new one, because you have that generate ability, it'll explain, what the API key is used for, and then give you some other options. Another security option here is this read-only access. And this is especially nice for the third-party reporting tools, because all you're doing is pulling data into a third-party system for consumption. And so there's an added layer of security to set those keys to read-only so that you can't push data back into Journyx from that third-party system. And then, of course, you also have, as I mentioned, the expiration with 180 days being the maximum. You also have the option to review any keys that you have or that you've already created, and it'll show you, when they were created. It'll tell you if it's read-only, when it expires. So all the information that you need to manage these keys so that you can use them to securely access your Journyx data elsewhere. So moving on from reporting, I mentioned that we also included some improvements for timesheet automation and notifications. And we'll just stay right here in this area for user settings. So any user who is using suggested entries on the timesheet, so events that come in from elsewhere that suggest time entries, now has an option to automatically hide events. And the idea here is that, we all have our own ways of indicating, say, on our calendar, for example, that something's personal, or that we're out of the office, or, whatever the case may be. And so what we've added here is the ability to, prior to this, those suggestions would just be loaded into our time entry screen, and we'd have to, ignore them or manually remove them or whatever the case may be. But, if there's a pattern that can be recognized so that they're automatically hidden, that would be better. So what we have here is the ability to automatically hide suggestions based on either a keyword or a phrase. If it's a single word, it'll hide based on the word. If it's more than one word, then it'll hide based on the phrase. And it's pretty easy to see if you add a new one. It explains exactly what the rules are in terms of case sensitivity, which does not have to be. But if you put more than one word, then it must match the entire phrase. So it explains to the end user exactly what they're doing here. And of course, you can also do it on subject only, subject and body. Flexible options here for telling it what to ignore. And then, of course, you can manage your words and phrases here as well. So let's take a look real quick at my suggested entries. I'm going to load them. And one thing you'll see in my descriptions are a couple references to sprints. So let's pretend that my sprints, I love how Microsoft, whenever I put any meetings that have sprints in the name, they put a tennis shoe next to it like I'm running. So let's pretend that anything that has sprints in it is really my personal time. And I'm not going to save that, so it's just letting me know. We're not saving these right now. So let's go add one. has Sprint. Outside of both. So I want it to automatically ignore anything that has Sprint in it because that's something personal for me and not something that I log on my timesheet. So I go back, I load my entries, and you'll notice now I've got 2 hidden suggestions. So it automatically went to my hidden suggestions, no reference of Sprint any longer in my entries. And if for some reason I'm looking at this and I'm like, wait, where did my, so-and-so meeting go? If I accidentally hid something I didn't really mean to, I can still load those hidden entries again. So nothing will be lost. But if I'm auto-loading my suggestions or I don't want to review all these things that don't apply, then I don't have to manually ignore them like so. I can just put them in hidden automatically based on a keyword or phrase. And we'll be expanding this engine over time to help manage suggestions so that you see exactly what it is that you want to see appear in this list of suggestions for your time entry screen. Now, in addition to suggestions, some other improvements for both our time entry users as well as our managers is this new area for notifications. And as you can see, Ellen has notice of rejected sheets and then sheets that were approved. And when those notifications first appear, there's a number on the bell. In this case, he had already seen them. He'd already reviewed them, so there were no numbers. Now he can go down here and he can dismiss them. Okay, 2 of his sheets were approved. I can make that go away. And he can also click on them if he needs to do something about it, like go review his rejected sheets, so that a notification takes him to his rejected sheets so that he can act upon them. So you can see how this is helpful for the end user. And I will point out that these notifications are tied to what was previously in the menu. So let's take a look at this. So prior to the notifications area being here in 12, what we would see are numbers in the menus. And so they were little red numbers. So those have now been moved to a notification section where you can do a better job of managing them, of seeing what they are, clicking to where you need to go, and then of course clearing them when they're no longer relevant. So that's just what happened here is the menu-based notifications moved to this new area. Now the notifications section, the new feature for it does not yet have the option to also feed in your email notifications, but that is something we expect to do in the future. But right now the email notifications are still separate, but these menu-based notifications have all been moved into this new notifications area where we should be able to take a more holistic view to your system notifications and things you need to know. So let's take a look real quick. Like I said, Alan was our time entry user. Let's take a look at an approver, because obviously her notifications will be helpful as well. And you can see the number because she hasn't reviewed and cleared these. And you can see kind of a summary of what it is that she's gotten notification of. And let's say, oops, I cleared that by accident, sorry. I meant to click on leave request, but I cleared it. So anyway, we have notice of everything that has happened since she last viewed her notifications, and then she can click on them to do what she wants to do, like go view leave if she doesn't accidentally click on the X like I did. All right, so let's move on now that we are logged in as a manager. Let's move on to the feature I mentioned that, there we go, came back. There we go. So we can click and go to the leave request if you're careful enough with your mouse. So let's return then to approvals, because I mentioned that we had overhauled the user experience for manager approvals in Journyx 12, and we've added some refinements to that process to make it even easier for managers to see exactly what it is that they want to see. So I have, for example, these search results where I go to approve sheets, and I can show, however many results I want to. But one of the things that we added is that if I change this and I go away and I come back, it will remember my change. So for those of you who've been using Journyx for a long time, you may know that a lot of the management screens, the old management screens, are keyed to this system setting. It says, how many results do you show by default? And everybody has to default to what the Journyx administrator decides is the default number of results. These new screens, these card-based screens, will all allow individuals to pick how many results they want to see, and it can vary by screen to screen. So maybe, if I'm looking at projects, I might want to see more. If I'm looking at approvals, I want to see less. But the point is, each user, when he or she is logged in, can pick what makes sense for the default, and that default will be remembered going forward. It's something that's saved in the database, so it's not specific to a browser or a session or anything like that. So pretty cool. This will eventually give people a lot more control over the defaults that are shown in the interface and make it easier to do what they need to do. So in addition to the managing your queue and search results, we also added some options for viewing sheets. We made the sheet a lot cleaner and simpler in 12, and that was deliberate. We wanted for reviewers to be able to see the key data they need to see quickly without having to scan through large amounts of data. And so, it defaults to showing just the project totals and comments, but you can make changes to these. And this was also in 12 to see the individual days, so not just the totals for the week, but also the days. And now in Endeavor, you can see you can drill down to the level of the time entry that you want to see, and it will remember that. So prior to this, you could open up to a certain level, and that was all well and good, but you couldn't choose a specific level and maintain it. So let's say I always want to see project and activity, and you may have these fields called something different, and that's fine. But I always want to see the 2 levels here, and maybe I'll go back to the summary. So I always need to see that activity. That's important for my review. You could also do it with bill type. Obviously, sometimes the billable information is what you need to see. So I can set it to the level that I want to see, and as I page through sheets, it will maintain those settings. Likewise, most of you have, there are a variety of ways to set the time format that you see in various views. There are the hours, minutes, there's decimal. Sometimes you allow people to do both, but generally when you save it, it saves in a format that you've designated. And so we've added this option here to view all time in decimal if that's your preferred time format. And again, as you scroll through the sheets, all of these settings are remembered. So you can pick your view, your particular view, and stick to it as you view the various sheets. So this just gives managers a little bit more control over the summary details that they see based on what it is, the kind of critical information that they need to review before they approve or reject a sheet. Right. And that brings us to the final feature, the PX feature that, like I said, those of you who use Journyx PX will perhaps be familiar with or perhaps not, but let's take a look at it. I'll explain how it worked before and how it works now. So we'll go to our PX style projects, our scheduled projects. Create one. So right here, we have some new settings. PX projects require assignments that individuals be assigned to those projects. And there are 2 different ways to do it. You can assign a particular user only one time to a specific task. So I will work, 6 months on this project, and that's my one assignment, and that's it. Or I might need to assign a user to a task more than once. So maybe I do the project on monthly allocations. So my allocation for February is X, for March is X, and April is X. And each of those, February, March, April, is a separate assignment. So I'm assigned to that task 3 times, but for different date ranges. So those are the 2 types of assignment processes. And prior to the Endeavor release, you had to pick one for the whole system. You could either assign people once, and that was how you managed your PX projects, or you could decide that you had that need to kind of do those monthly allocations as an example. And so you would set it to allow for assignments of a user to a task more than once. Now, what you can do here is manage this literally by the task in Endeavor. No longer is it a system setting. You can choose project by project, task by task. So if you're setting up a project that's going to have tasks underneath it, you can set it to inherit. You can set it to yes or no for multiple assignments. So we'll say no, we're going to allow single assignments. But then as you create tasks underneath this project, you can set it to inherit, and it'll take that setting from the top level project. Or you can do something different for each task. So literally you can control it at the task level. So I could have a project where one task is done in, one task underneath it is done in monthly allocations, and another task is just a finite, period where each person is assigned once. So this adds granularity for, and most customers that we've talked with who have this need are likely to set the assignment type at the project level. So it's more that they have like different types of projects. So some projects are planned, on a recurring basis, and others are finite time. And so they would use these different assignment modes for their different project types. But this is a move of a feature that, like I said, was more limited, could only be set at the system level to the individual task level. So that covers all of our new features. I'm just going to wrap up with a little bit of information, and then we can open up the floor for questions. Journyx 12, all of Journyx 12 is cloud first. We're really focused on making sure that we deliver value to our cloud as quickly as possible with as much meat as possible. And our professional service teams always offers training and assistance with upgrades, so we encourage you to make use of that. You are also welcome to ask your account manager for a demo site. We always make those available with new releases, and so if you'd like to kind of try these out on your own first on the demo site, we'd be happy to do that. So I think that covers the nuts and bolts of the training. Let's go ahead and open up the floor for questions.
Great, thank you, Meredith. And again, if you have any questions, go ahead and pop those into the questions box in your GoToWebinar panel. And we have one question so far. Previously, time for multiple projects did not show on the compliance report or on the approvals by project. So have there been any improvements in that area?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I've missed the beginning. I'm sorry.
So previously, time for multiple projects did not show on the compliance report and did not show approvals by project. So have there been any improvements in project approvals?
I'm not familiar with the issue. I'm not aware of any time that doesn't show for project approvals. So I guess what I couldn't say. This sounds like something that maybe ought to be submitted to support, because like I said, I'm unaware of any. If a project has a project approval, then its time should always appear in project approvals when it's submitted. So if that's not happening, then that's a bug. So go ahead and report that to support.
Okay, great. Thank you, Meredith. Next question, have you tested performance both on the reports and on the API connections? And I'm, for some strange reason, having trouble actually opening up this full question, but they're talking about how they have millions of records, and so they just want to make sure that performance has been tested on those reports and on the API connections.
Yes, we have definitely tested performance on the reports, and the idea of pagination is in part to help improve performance versus the old reports that would just try to show absolutely everything on the screen. So I don't know that performance would be much improved if you did, an expand all, show all, but it should not in any way be degraded. And we have tested performance and are certain that the pagination and some of the summarization with the drill down speeds up reports quite a lot. We have not done API key performance testing, so that is something that we will definitely include in future testing. But it's a good question.
Yes, thank you, Meredith. If there are no other, one more question. Are matrix reports still available, and can they include fields that have historical time entries selected?
Yes, they are still available, and yes, you can select fields that have historical time entry selected.
Okay, great. Excellent. Thank you so much, Meredith, and thank you all for coming back to today's webinar. And again, the recording will be posted in the user community. That address is community.journyx.com, and will also be emailed out to all customers as early as tomorrow. Thank you again for attending, and have a great rest of your day.